Hi guys, so I thought I would make a video demonstrating how you can take notes based off of the textbook, some tips and tricks on what you should be writing down, what your notes should look like, that sort of thing. So I've got up ALEKS, where our ebook is, plus I'm just going to use OneNote for notes. You can do it on paper, but this way I can kind of show both at the same time. So in ALEKS, I'm going to navigate to the textbook. Make sure I click on the ebook, and so it's opening up this new window. And so it just opens wherever I left off. So let's actually say you're going to take notes on 1.1. Oops. So I'm going to click 1.1. Okay, and this is what I'm going to take notes on. I want to make sure that this is easy for you guys to read. Is there a way to, let's see. Make text size bigger. I don't see a way. There's no zoom that I am seeing here, unless highlight, bookmarks. Yeah, it looks like just, okay, this is as close as I can get. So what I'm going to do is send this behind, and there we go. Okay, so I'm going to just move it so that I've got more of my note-taking available. Okay, so let's say you are taking notes on 1.1. So I'm going to do a mix of typing and my stylus just because I'm doing this on a computer, but otherwise if you're doing it on paper you would just write it down. So in OneNote I have these options with styles, which is going to help a lot. So I'm going to start with putting the name of the chapter. Chapter 1, Linear Equations and Inequalities. Qualities. And then I'm going to go to a style and I'm going to have another header for the sections. 1.1 is algebraic expressions and models. So it's really important to write down the chapter names and the section names. Well, you want the number, so that way if something refers to, like, read this chapter, you know where to find it, but you also want the names, because when I have my list of things that you're going to be quizzed on, topics that are on the quiz, one of them will say linear equations. So you need to know what chapter to go to for that. You need to know what section. It might say simplified algebraic expressions. So then you need to be able to figure out, okay, that's section 1.1. So those keywords tell you where you're going to be looking, and it's going to help things be organized for you. Now you are not required to write down the objectives, but they are very helpful because that also tells you what you're learning in that week or in that section. So that way, if you have a question and you're like, okay, where did we cover algebraic models or something like that, it kind of tells you where they are. So I'm going to just fold that, and then properties, numbers, simplify expressions, and I could just copy and paste in here as well. Terms, and then algebraic models. So those are just, so I know what topics are covered in this week. Okay. Now they've organized everything by each objective. I don't think that's as important to write notes on, but you can if you want. If you want to go to, have another heading and then say, okay, we're going to apply properties of real numbers, you can do that. So when we're looking at here, you want to pay attention to the bold terms here. So we have constant term, we have variable term. It's automatically highlighting those for me, which is pretty neat. Oh, it's because I got the highlighter on. So we're defining words here, and so you want to have those terms down. What's really nice, and I'm actually going to go back to ALEKS, is for writing those definitions, I would actually go back to this dictionary, and then I would search for those terms. So, so the first one, variable term, is the first one we to here. So I'm going to type in variable term. Nothing's coming up, but if I type in variable, we've got right here. So I would want to be putting the definitions in your notes, because that way when you come up with these words, you need to know, you know what it means. And I would actually either have just your dictionary up so you can look anything up, or make your own separate note taking for, you know, however you want to organize it. This OneNote that I have open, I've organized by week. Really, this should be in week 1. I don't really have it organized the way that I would if I was taking notes. I'm just using an example. But you can, the nice thing about doing things electronically is that I can just copy and paste the definitions right there. What's really nice is that it gives you all this extra information. You can then click term, you can add that in as well. So the one thing you want to make sure is you're actually taking notes on the definitions and providing examples. So let's say I just want to copy all of this. You'd really want to write down all of this. Now, unfortunately, the copy and paste didn't work well with the equations. So that was a big mess. So that's a downside. You'd want to type these up yourself. That clearly did not work. But let's just say I do this. So what I like to do, and it already came in with some formatting and made the definition yellow, but I like to have all my terms, oops, wanted the highlighter. I like to have all of my terms highlighted, not necessarily the definition, but I want the words highlighted. So now I have to do some, because I'm just copy and pasting, I have to do some extra. Oh, it doesn't even let me get rid of that background. Let's see. Oh, I don't want to delete. Yeah, it just automatically deletes it. Well, if you're doing this by hand, you can do it any way you want, but I like to have my terms highlighted. So you're going to want to make sure that you write down all of your definitions, you provide some examples, and then you're going to want to make sure, I would go through, write down all these definitions, maybe put the definition from that dictionary in, and then I would watch the lecture, and then you'd want to take notes on the lecture, writing down the problems. So I'm going to open up this lecture, and then you guys are not going to hear the sound because I don't have that as part of the recording as well, but obviously there would be sound. And then I would pause right here, and so what's really nice is that it's got, well, it's right now because I paused it's blank, but there's captions here. So it says an algebraic expression is a single term or the sum of 2 or more terms. So that would be part of your definition that you would already have written down. And if you didn't have it written down, then you would write that down. And so we would go through, they're explaining, I'm hearing this sound, so this is confusing me. But we've got this example. So that's where you want to write down. And when you take examples, when you do examples, you want to write down the directions as well as the exact example, because the directions are going to be similar to things that are on the quizzes and the homework, and so that's how you find similar problems. So I'm going to move this up, and let's say I'm going to have an example. So maybe I will use some header for examples. Example. List the terms and coefficients of each term. And of course I would normally be doing this by hand. And then I'm going to type in the math. Now because I'm typing this up, I can use all the math shortcuts that are in Word, but otherwise you would write down, you make sure you write down the equation. Okay. And then we've got terms, coefficients. And so then you would be watching the video and then you would make notes. So I'm going to push play so you can kind of see what's going on. Of course, you're not going to hear it, but you can see the captions so that, you can see the captions on there explaining what would be happening. And so you can see what they're doing is rewriting all the minuses as pluses. So you would do the same thing. And so maybe what I would do in my notes here, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit, make sure you guys can see it, is I would rewrite it. So normally I would put the directions and everything in one color and then the work in another color. So let's do my work in blue. So I'm going to rewrite this like they are doing. I'm not going to put, well, I can put the parentheses around here. But I'm basically writing down each step of the video. And now the one thing that you don't want to just write down what's in the video, you want to actually write down an explanation of what's going on. So let's say I do that in another color. I'm move my keyboard a little bit out of the way. So I'm now using my stylus. And then I would say, okay, and actually, I'm gonna move this over because so that you guys can see it. Rewrite all negatives as, or all subtractions, I should say, as adding a negative. So I'm writing down the directions, so that way when you're looking at something for an example, you have the directions right there. So I did the math first and then the directions, but some people prefer to do directions first and then math. So if you were going to do it that way, and I can just, this is the beauty of doing this electronically, so I can just erase all this. So let's say you wanted to do directions first. So I'm going to just number it and say, rewrite all subtraction as adding a negative. And then I would do in blue, I would actually do that. 12x squared y to the 5th plus negative xy to the 4th plus 9.2 xy cubed. So this is how you want to show your work. You'd want to write down the steps and you want to write down the actual direction so you have something to look at, you have what you're supposed to be doing, so you know that these steps go with that direction. So I'm going to continue playing the video. Of course, I have an advantage because I know what the video is doing, but you might write down any additional explanation that you were unsure with. And so now we're just identifying the terms and we're listing them out. So what I might do here is you're going to want to do it in a way that makes sense to you. So maybe just writing the terms like they do in the video doesn't make sense. Maybe it makes sense for you to highlight all of the things in between the pluses because those are our terms. And so maybe what you want to do, and then, you know, maybe use a different color or however you want to do this. And then you can label term, term, term. And so you can see that we have 3 terms. So you can break it down whichever way makes sense to you. You don't have to copy exactly as it is in the video where they just wrote it next to the word terms. You can do it this way in a way that makes sense to you. And then you might want to say, you might want to write terms, or maybe, let's say, maybe I do this in gray, whatever you want your color coding to be. Terms are separated by a plus sign. So you have a note there so that you know that's how you know what the terms are. You want to kind of give yourself some directions here so when you're looking at your notes you can actually use them. So next part of the video is coefficients. So okay, I'm going to continue playing the video and you know they're still writing out the terms there. And then they're going to go to the coefficients and you see how they highlight, or they, you know, they're circling the coefficients, and we had to add a 1 in front of that negative x. So maybe you say, okay, we've got terms are separated by a plus or minus. And let's say I want to rewrite it again, but I want to make sure that I put that negative 1 in front of, you know, instead of doing it the way that they did, I want to write it in a way that makes sense to me. So I'm going to rewrite it and make sure I have that minus 1 there. We already know the terms are separated by the plus sign. So maybe what you do is now you highlight all the numbers in front, and those are your coefficients. So maybe you don't even need to have that direction, that number one step, because it was one step and then you're going from here. Or maybe you would put another direction. You know, maybe you combine these as a single step, rewrite all subtraction as a negative, add ones if there's no coefficient, or if there's no number. And so then we can put arrows towards that, and these are all coefficients. And so then you can just label, make sure you spell it right. And you can write any additional directions that you need. So you're taking notes on the video, but you're adding in the information that you need that you don't want to write it exactly as in the video. You're missing the verbal directions. You know, there may be other things that aren't written down that you might need to write down. So that's an example of taking notes from a video, and then I can just go back to see the related reading. So there's other videos. Anytime you see a table like this, definitely write it down. And what I would recommend is, oh great, it says in symbols and in words. The words, the explanation of what it means. The order in which the numbers are added does not affect the sum. So you could just say the order doesn't matter. So putting it in your own words really helps. So you put the math definition and then you put it in your own words and then have an example. So I would just copy down this whole table because this is very helpful, and then you can use it as a reference. Examples. So what I would do, let's say you've got an example, we've got 4 examples here, and then we've got the directions, apply the distributive property. So here's how I would take notes here. I'm gonna fill lots me, there we go. Okay. So I'm gonna go back and zoom out again. So I had my example right there. So I think that was heading 3. So again, I'm gonna just type in example. And then I'm going to type in the directions, apply the distributive property. And then I'm not going to list all 4 of them because I'm going to repeat the directions for each one. So I'm only going to do, let's say the first one there, 4 times 2x plus 5. Or what you could do is do it in columns so that you can see that the directions apply to multiple things. But I would just do one at a time here. So I'm going to move this up. So here's how I would write notes for this. So we've got example, apply the distributive property. And you can see in the textbook, this is the solution here. So you want to basically copy it down, but you also want to make sure at each step you understand what is going on. So they have directions here that says apply the distributive property. So maybe you might want to write down the distributive property first, so that way you have in your head, okay, this is what the distributive property is, and now this is what we're doing. So we can go back here, and let's say you want to rewrite this in your notes. So I'm going to just copy and paste. It's probably not even going to paste nicely. Oh, okay, that worked. So let's say I just put it to the side here. You know, just somewhere off to the side so you have that as a reference. So what I do when I'm taking my notes is, again, I rewrite the problem. So I just do that so that way I can work the problem separate from how it was given. Okay, and then let's say you want to write the steps. So first, so they just say apply the distributive property. That's not very descriptive. So I would say multiply, because I would describe what's happening here. Multiply through the parentheses is how I usually say it. You want to describe what's going on. And so we're doing 4 times 2x, so that's 4 times 2x plus, and then we're also doing 4 times 5. So that would be, instead of writing apply the distributive property, I would put it in words that I understand. But you want to write those directions so that you can see this and you understand what's going on. Then they have their next step, simplify using the associative property of multiplication. maybe you don't really need to know that it's using the associative property of multiplication, but you just kind of want that as a reference. So I can just copy and paste, and again, I can just kind of stick that in my notes here. Of course, I have it so not all of the notes are showing on my screen here because I'm limited on what I can show you guys when I'm trying to show the textbook at the same time. But let's say I just copy that in. And then if you want, you could say, okay, step 2, simplify. And basically, the associative property of multiplication says that we can just multiply the numbers together. And that's sort of self-explanatory, so you may not even need to write that down. So that would be 4 times 2, that gives us our 8x, plus 4 times 5 is 20. But let's say that that wasn't clear to you, that you're just multiplying the numbers. So you might want to be a little more clear about how that is the associative property of multiplication. So I'm going to just move to the right and say, and rewrite what we have. We have 4 times 2x plus 4 times 5. So the 4 times 5 is obvious. That's 20. We have the associative property here that says that the order of multiplication doesn't matter, so you can group them differently. So you may want to add an extra step, or you may want to change the way it's grouping to make that clear that, okay, I can actually group the 4 and the 2 together. And then that gives me 8x plus 20. So if the book says something, it says use the associative property of multiplication, and you're not seeing where that's following, you can copy it in, kind of see what it tells you, maybe add some extra steps as needed if it doesn't make sense to you. But if what they did, that you're just multiplying the numbers, makes sense to you, that's fine. You can even write down, let me put this in green, multiply numbers or something, just so you can see, okay, that's what I'm doing. I'm going to multiply those numbers together. So that's how I would write notes, and then I would repeat the process. I would rewrite example, I'd rewrite the directions, and then I would do it with the second example. So that way it's clear that each example is separate and that these aren't all the same problem here, because that could get kind of confusing. And then there's practices. So I would recommend doing the practice just to test that you understand what's going on. Maybe, so this part A here is similar to the one we just did, so maybe you want to go to the right or do it right after that to see if you can get the same answer. I would definitely rewrite these tips. Those tips are going to be helpful. So that's how I would take notes from the textbook. And so work through the textbook, watch those videos, take notes from the videos, write down the examples, copy down definitions. You may find having electronic notes for like definitions and rules that you can copy and paste are great, and then doing handwritten work for the actual examples. Maybe print out your definitions for later, or just have them on your computer for when you're just a reference. Whatever you need for taking notes. You may want to have those separate from your examples. So then let's go back to ALEKS. So let's say you've gone through all this, now you're ready to do the problems in the book, or problems, the homework problems. So I'm just going to go to assignments here, and I'm going to just start working on the first one, review homework number 1. Okay. And then I'm going to use start. So you're going to want to also do your homework problems on paper, definitely in pencil, so you can make changes if you need to. If there's like pictures, something like this, maybe you might want to print it out. I think right click and print works. You can't see that. There you go. There's a print option, so maybe you want to print that out for your notes. Let me find one that's actually, okay, those are kind of one-step problems. See if I can find a distributive. Okay, so order of operations problem here. You're going to want to do it on paper. Use your notes for a guide. See if you have other order of operations problems here. If you're going to use any of these resources, like let's say you want to use the explanation resource, it will actually work through this. I would take notes on this. Same way you would take notes from the textbook. Take notes, and they're giving you the directions, they're telling you what to do. Okay, however you want to take notes, but you'd want to write this down. You don't want to just look at it or just copy down the math steps. Treat it like you're taking notes because you're learning from it. And then you can return a question and it'll give you a new one, or do try another so that you can get a new one with different numbers, and then you go through. So that's how I would take notes. Use the homework also as notes, so it's adding to your collection of examples so that by the time you go through the book, you go through the videos, and you go through the homework, you're going to have tons of examples. And the nice thing about doing it electronically is I can group it by topic. So I can put all my order of operations problems together. So I wouldn't, like, this is an order of operation. I wouldn't put it on this same page where I have this because it's not the right section. It doesn't go with this section. I would put it in chapter R where that's with. So that's why I recommend a binder, because if you have loose leaf paper, you can put them in the appropriate section. So you don't want to have your notes all over the place. You want to group things together. So if you're doing the homework, you may not be doing it all in one line because they may go with different sections. So you want to kind of line it up with each section, so that way when you see something similar, you have all of those problems together. They're all similar in one spot and you don't have to go hunting. So that is my advice for taking notes. Hopefully this is helpful. Hopefully you could read it quickly, or it was big enough, since I couldn't necessarily zoom in on the textbook. This part does let me zoom in, so I could zoom in here a bit, but hopefully this gives you an idea of how to take notes on math and how to organize it. So this was long, half an hour. So okay, so thank you for watching, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.